Lesson 53, Ideology. Generally speaking, Democrats tend to be more liberal or progressive. Republicans tend to be more conservative. What's the difference? To answer that question, you have to understand what is a political ideology. Liberalism and conservatism are political ideologies. Political ideology, a belief system that explains and justifies a preferred economic and governmental order for society, offers strategies for its maintenance or attainment, and helps give meaning to public events, personalities, and policies. You can say an ideology is an organized system of beliefs in layman's terms. What's the difference? This is a good chart here, I think, that shows the difference between these different political ideologies. On this grid here, we have the horizontal blue continuum, a low belief in state power to a high belief in state power. And on the vertical continuum, a low belief in equality of individuals, a high belief in equalities of individuals. Communism in the upper right quadrant would have a high belief in the equality of individuals, but also a high belief in state power. Fascism in the bottom right quadrant would have a low belief in the equality of individuals, but a high belief in state power. Libertarianism, the bottom left quadrant, would have a low belief in the equality of individuals, but also a low belief in state power. Anarchism would have a high belief in the equality of individuals, but a low belief in state power. So, U.S. Democrats and U.S. Republicans, Democrats generally would have a higher belief in the equality of individuals and a higher belief in state power, whereas Republicans would have a little bit lower belief in the equality of individuals and a lower belief in state power. What it boils down to is conservatives are neat freaks and liberals are slobs. Okay. Let's take a look at liberalism or progressive values. The political left, the left wing of the political spectrum, the left wing, liberalism. Strong emphasis on personal liberty and freedom. Change leads to progress, and that's where you get the term progressive. A strong belief in change. I think a favorite quote by liberals: some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not? Change leads to progress. Government can be an agent of change. A strong emphasis on equality in the workplace, in the criminal justice system, and in rights. Open-mindedness. Equality of opportunity. Man's nature is perfectible. With proper education, resources, and leadership, man's nature is basically a tabula rasa. It can be impacted greatly by one's environment. You take a person and put him in a good environment with good education, good resources, good leadership, and that person would turn out quite differently than somebody with the converse of those situations. Man's nature is perfectible. Emphasis on community and social responsibility. On the other hand, conservative values, or the political right, the right wing, strong regard for the past, very nostalgic, looking on the past in a very favorable light. Going to make America great again. In the past, it was once great. Trying to get back to that past. Tradition, of course, would fall into that. status quo. Change does not necessarily bring about progress. So the emphasis on the status quo, the way things are right now. Strong belief in faith-based institutions, churches. Strong belief in public morality, law and order. Emphasis on market solutions and free enterprise to solve problems rather than governmental solutions. The market's really big. Private sector versus public sector. Certainly the conservatives would believe strongly in the private sector, in emphasis on personal responsibility, much more so than the social responsibility that members of the left would adhere to. Now, what influences a person's ideology? If you take a look at the top, certainly your geography. We'll work clockwise from geographic area. Certain parts of the country are very conservative or liberal, such as the South. The South is very conservative. The rural South in particular. Then you get to the west coast of the United States with California and Oregon and Washington State, much more liberal. In fact, some people call the West Coast the left coast. So, the area in which you live has an impact and an influence on your ideology. Your ethnic or racial heritage influences your ideology. African Americans, for example, tend to be more liberal or progressive. Ethnicity, gender, your friends certainly influence your ideology, your political views, your religious beliefs for sure, your family, particularly at a young age. If you have conservative parents, there's probably a good likelihood that you too are conservative. And the converse is true for liberals. Your socioeconomic status, usually the more wealth you have, the more conservative you are, the older you are, maybe the more conservative you are. Education affects your ideology. The media has a big impact. You can watch Fox News if you're conservative and have all your conservative views reinforced. Or watch MSNBC if you're progressive and have all your progressive views reinforced. But the media certainly has an impact on your ideology as well. Are you liberal or conservative? Okay, today's Republicans and Democrats. Both parties try to appeal to as many voters as possible because they want to win elections. Both claim to be big tent parties, meaning all sorts of different groups of people are welcome. For the most part, the parties tend to adopt mainstream or middle-of-the-road, more moderate positions, try to avoid the extremes. When you compare our political parties with Europe on the political spectrum, our parties are much more alike than not. It's not as wide-ranging, particularly the two parties, Democrat and Republicans. Some say there's not much difference between the parties. There's a mashup between the donkey and the elephant. The Republicrats, the party of, for, and by the corporations. Some claim that big money, big business, rich donors control the parties. Not much difference. What each party tries to do is to paint the other party as extreme and out of touch with mainstream American values. The Democrats, for example, try to paint the Republicans as right-wing wackos, Bible-thumping, war-mongering, anti-science, gun-loving fascists, bigots, xenophobes, racists. On the other hand, Republicans try to paint the Democrats as left-wing loonies, God-hating, tree-hugging, terrorist-loving, gay-embracing socialists, communists. These, of course, are caricatures of each party, and some of the extreme elements of both parties may have some of these characteristics, but not the majority. But each party tries to paint the other in that fashion. Third parties have never won a presidential election, but they have influenced the outcome and have influenced policy. A great example would be the Populist Party of the 1890s, made up of laborers and farmers. They called for the direct election of senators, an 8-hour workday. And those platforms, positions of the Populist Party, their agenda was adopted. 17th Amendment gave citizens the right to elect their senators by popular vote, and we have an 8-hour workday today. Except for teachers who work longer. And so once the agenda or platform of the populists were embraced, there was really no need for the Populist Party anymore. So that's what the major parties do. They oftentimes embrace or adopt the platform ideas, the policy ideas of the third parties, and then the third parties eventually end up fading away. Spoilers. These are third-party candidates who take votes away from the major party candidates, enabling the other to win. Ross Perot was a spoiler in 1992. Third-party candidate, allowed Bill Clinton to beat George H.W. Bush. Ralph Nader was a third-party candidate who spoiled the election in 2000, allowing George W. Bush to defeat Al Gore. So third-party candidates can play the role of spoiler. There's Ross Perot in the 1992 election, Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush. And you can see that Ross Perot actually had 18.9% of the popular vote, 19.7 million total votes. And most political analysts believe that Perot took those votes away from George H.W. Bush, enabling Bill Clinton to win in 1992. And then in 2000, there's George W. Bush on the right and Al Gore on the left, and Ralph Nader playing the role of spoiler. In Florida, the big key state, the difference in the election, there was only a 537 vote margin difference. Nader received over 97,000 votes in Florida, and many believe that those votes would have gone to Al Gore had Nader not been on the ballot. Single issue parties, these are parties that believe in just like one political issue, like the Prohibition Party. They want to do away with alcohol. And once the major party adopts that position, the single issue party fades away. Ideological parties focus on changing society in major ways, like the Communist Party, the Libertarian Party. And because of such major change, they hardly ever win elections in American politics. Independent candidates certainly can impact elections. John Anderson, 1980, had 7% of the popular vote. George Wallace, 1968, actually had 10 million votes. He 13% of the vote, won 5 southern states and 46 electoral votes. These are candidates, and parties form around these candidates, but they fade away after the candidate's defeat. We have 2 independents in the Senate today, Bernie Sanders from Vermont and Angus King from Maine. Other party systems, most democracies are multi-party systems, meaning that more than 2 political parties win elections, so they have to work together. You have what's called coalition governments. In France, for example, take a look at all these political parties in France that are actually in the French National Assembly. I'm counting 7 on that list. Advantages and disadvantages of a 2-party system. More stable, big tent, always a majority to govern, accountability. Disadvantages, less choice for voters, have to appeal to so many.